I was
knew about this
standing
the
in my
whole time,
own
didn't
kitchen,
you, Mama? How could
the
you
same
say
kitchen
that?
where I had baked birthday cakes, packed school lunches, and prayed over unpaid bills for more than 30 years, when my daughter pointed at me in front of everyone and said, "Mom, you're basically a squatter in this kitchen now." The room went so quiet, I could hear the coffee dripping behind me. Amanda
I'm very sorry,
smiled
but the
like she
appeal
had
was
already
denied.
won.
This is the official
Her
notice to
husband
vacate
looked
the
at the
property.
floor.
How can they do
The
this to
guests
us?
stared at their plates. But I didn't cry. I only wiped my hands on my apron and looked toward the front door. Because the county clerk was about to arrive with the papers my daughter thought no one would ever find. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if stories like this touch your heart. And I'd really love to know what you think. Was I wrong for staying silent until the truth arrived? Leave a comment with your thoughts and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes, knowing someone is listening from another part of the world makes a painful story feel a little less lonely. Before that morning in the kitchen, before my daughter's voice turned sharp enough to cut through 37 years of memories, that house had been my whole world. My name is Nicole Wright, and for most of my life, I believed a home was something you built with patience, sacrifice, and love. Not just with bricks or wood or a mortgage payment, but with every quiet thing nobody claps for. The meals cooked after your feet are swollen. The bills paid when your hands are shaking. The rooms cleaned while everyone else is asleep. The prayers whispered over children who have no idea how much you are carrying for them. Our house sat on Maple Street in a small town in Ohio called Maple Grove. It was not fancy. It was not the kind of house people stopped to admire from the sidewalk. When my husband James and I first moved in, the porch leaned a little to the left, the roof had 2 bad spots, and the kitchen floor made a tired groaning sound every time someone crossed it. But James stood in this doorway on our first day there, holding a cardboard box against his hip and said, "Nicole, this place has good bones." I laughed and told him it better because we don't have money for new bones. That was how we lived back then, laughing before worry could swallow us, making do, stretching every dollar, turning second-hand furniture into something warm with clean sheets, fresh curtains, and a little faith. I was 30 years old when we moved in. Amanda was only 5. She had 2 missing front teeth pigtails that never stayed even and a habit of asking 1,000 questions before breakfast. She ran through that empty house like it was a palace. She claimed the small bedroom facing the backyard because she said the maple tree outside looked like it was waving at her. James painted that room pale yellow for her. I still remember him standing on an old chair, paint on his cheek, while Amanda sat on the floor with a peanut butter sandwich giving him instructions like she was the contractor. "Daddy, don't forget that corner." "Yes, ma'am," he said, saluting her with the paintbrush. Those were the days I thought would last longer. The kitchen became the heart of our home almost immediately. It was small, with cream-colored cabinets and a window over the sink that looked out toward the backyard. In spring, I could see tulips coming up along the fence. In winter, I could watch James shovel snow, while Amanda pressed her face to the glass and laughed when he pretended to slip. That kitchen held everything. It held the smell of cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning. It held Thanksgiving turkeys that never came out quite as pretty as the magazine pictures, but always tasted like love. It held school projects spread across the table, Amanda crying over fractions, James trying to help, even though math had never been his gift. It held late-night talks when Amanda became a teenager and started thinking I knew nothing about the world. It held the morning she got accepted into college. She came running in with the letter in her hand, screaming so loudly, I dropped a mug in the sink. James picked her up like she was still 5 years old, and I cried right there beside the stove. We did not have much money, but somehow, some way we made sure she went. James took overtime. I cleaned offices in the evenings after my regular job at the library. We refinanced once cut back on vacations, drove the same car until the heater stopped working. And still, we told Amanda not to worry. "You just study," James would say. "Let us handle the rest." And we did. I do not say that to make myself sound like a saint. I was not one. I made mistakes. I lost my temper. I worried too much. Sometimes I held on too tightly because Amanda was our only child. And when you only get one, you pour everything into her until you forget there is supposed to be something left for yourself. But I loved that girl with my whole chest. After college, Amanda moved away for a while. She got a job in Columbus, then another one in Cleveland. She became polished in a way I never was. Nice clothes, perfect hair. Words like investment strategy and asset management rolled off her tongue like she had been born saying them. I was proud of her. I really was. But slowly, I began to notice something. Amanda started looking at my life like it was small. When she visited, she would glance around the house and say things like, "Mom, you really should update this place." Or, "You still keep paper receipts. Everything is digital now." Or, "You and Dad never really thought about maximizing value." At first, I brushed it off. Every generation thinks the one before it is a little outdated. I told myself that was all it was. Amanda was modern. I was old-fashioned. No crime in that. Then James died. It happened on a Tuesday morning. He had been drinking coffee at the kitchen table reading the local paper when his hand slipped from the mug. I heard the ceramic hit the floor and turned around just in time to see him slump sideways in his chair. A stroke, the doctors said. One moment, he was there. The next, my whole world had changed shape. After the funeral, the house became too quiet. I could still feel him everywhere. His jacket hung by the back door for 3 months because I could not bring myself to move it. His coffee cup stayed in the cabinet on the second shelf. His handwriting remained on little labels in the garage nail screws, holiday lights, old tax files. At night, I would sit in the kitchen with the light over the stove glowing soft yellow, and I would talk to him. "James, I don't know how to do this without you," I would whisper. Of course, he never answered. But somehow the house did. The floor creaked. The pipes hummed. The old refrigerator clicked on. Small sounds, familiar sounds, reminding me I was not completely alone. Amanda came around more often after James passed, but there was a difference in her visits. She was kind at first. She brought groceries, helped me sort sympathy cards, and called every Sunday evening. Then she married Brian Parker. Brian was charming in a smooth, careful way. The first time I met him, he brought flowers and called me Mrs. Wright, even after I told him to call me Nicole. He had owned a small home repair business, and Amanda said he was ambitious. James, before he passed, had only met him twice. He never said much against Brian, but one night after they left, James stood at the sink washing his hands longer than necessary. "What do you think of him?" I asked. James looked out the kitchen window and said, "He talks more about what things are worth than what they mean." I remember that sentence now more clearly than I did then. After they married, Amanda changed faster. She started correcting me in front of people. She told me I was too trusting. She said I did not understand how easy it was for older women to be taken advantage of. Sometimes she said it gently, like concern. Other times she said it with a tight little smile that made me feel like a child being scolded. Then Brian's business began to fail. I did not know the full story at first. Amanda only said they were going through a temporary setback. She called me one evening sounding tired, her voice thinner than usual. "Mom," she said, "I hate to ask this." I sat down at the kitchen table already afraid. "What is it, sweetheart?" She sighed. "Brian and I need somewhere to stay for a few months. Just until we get back on our feet." I looked around the kitchen. At the curtains I had sewn myself. At James's empty chair. At the little dent in the wall from the year Amanda tried to roller skate indoors. Every corner of that house carried a piece of us. And because she was my daughter, because I remembered her with missing teeth and paint on her fingers, because a mother's heart can be foolish in the name of love, I said yes before asking enough questions. Of course, I told her. This is your home too. There was a pause on the line. Then Amanda said softly, "Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. When they pulled into my driveway 2 weeks later with a rented moving truck, I stood on the porch with my arms folded against the cold Ohio wind. Amanda stepped out wearing sunglasses even though the sky was gray. Brian climbed down from the passenger side and gave me a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He looked past me at the house before he looked at me. Well, he said this place has more potential than I remembered. Something about the way he said potential made my stomach tighten. But Amanda hugged me, and for a moment, I let myself ignore that feeling. I held my daughter close and told myself this was what family did. We opened doors. We made room. We helped each other survive hard seasons. I did not know then that Amanda and Brian had not come back to my house looking for shelter. They had come looking for control, and the kitchen I had spent my life filling with love was about to become the first place where they tried to erase me. The first week Amanda and Brian lived with me, everything felt almost normal. Amanda hugged me every morning before leaving the house. Brian thanked me every time I cooked dinner. They insisted on helping with groceries and even brought home flowers one Friday evening. More than once, I caught myself feeling guilty for ever doubting them. Maybe they really had fallen on hard times. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe losing James had made me suspicious of everyone. For a little while, I allowed myself to believe that. Then the small changes began. The kind of changes that seem harmless by themselves, but feel very different when you put them all together. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs and found Amanda standing on a chair removing the kitchen curtains. The curtains were blue with tiny white flowers embroidered along the edges. I had sewn them myself almost 20 years earlier. "What happened?" I asked. Amanda smiled. "I ordered new ones." I stared at the empty window. "But I liked those." "Mom," she said gently, "they look dated." Dated? The word stung more than I expected, not because of the curtains, because lately it felt like Amanda used that word for everything connected to me. My furniture was dated, my recipes were dated, my habits were dated. Even my way of keeping family photographs in albums instead of on a phone was apparently dated. I tried to laugh it off. "They still block the sun." Amanda rolled her eyes playfully. "Trust me, you'll love the new ones." A week later, she replaced them with expensive gray curtains that looked like they belonged in a hotel lobby. The kitchen suddenly felt less like mine. Then Brian began making changes. At first, it seemed practical. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge, replaced an old light switch, adjusted the back gate. I appreciated those things. James had always handled repairs around the house, and after his death, there were jobs I simply couldn't manage myself. But Brian never seemed satisfied with fixing one thing. Every repair turned into an inspection. Every inspection turned into a suggestion. Every suggestion became a criticism. One evening, he was looking under the kitchen sink. A few minutes later, he emerged holding a folder. "What's this?" he asked. "My home insurance records." He flipped through the pages. "You keep all this?" "Of course." "You should digitize everything." I smiled politely. "I like having paper copies." He shrugged. "Seems risky." I took the folder from his hands. For a second, I thought I saw annoyance flash across his face. Then it disappeared. That became a pattern. Whenever I touched anything related to the house, Brian appeared interested. The insurance, the tax records. the utility bills, the maintenance receipts, the mortgage paperwork I had kept long after the loan was paid off. At first, I assumed he was simply organized. Then I noticed he never asked questions about family memories, only about ownership, only about value, only about paperwork. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and froze. The large framed photograph of James was gone. For a moment, panic rushed through me. That photo had always stood on the mantel. It was taken on our 25th anniversary. James was smiling into the camera while pretending not to notice me laughing beside him. I looked around the room. Nothing. I found Amanda in the dining room. "Where's your father's picture?" "Oh," she barely looked up from her phone. "I moved it." "You moved it where?" "Storage." I stared at her. Storage. It makes the room feel heavy. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Heavy. That photograph wasn't decoration. It was my husband, the father of her child, the man who spent decades building the life she enjoyed. I finally managed to say, "I liked it where it was." Amanda sighed dramatically. "Mom, sometimes houses need updating." Updating, that word again. As if memories were clutter, as if grief could be redecorated, as if James had become an inconvenience. That night, I went into the garage and searched through 3 storage boxes before finding the photograph wrapped in a blanket. I carried it back into the house, back to the mantel, back where it belonged. Amanda noticed the next morning. Neither of us mentioned it, but something changed between us. A tiny crack. The first visible fracture in what had once felt unbreakable. Over the following weeks, more things disappeared. A ceramic bowl James bought during a vacation. An old clock from my parents. Several framed family photographs. Every time I asked, Amanda had the same answer. "We're just trying to make the house look better." The strange thing was that nobody ever asked whether I wanted it to look different. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table paying bills, the same way I had done for decades. A notebook, a calculator, a stack of envelopes. Brian walked in carrying a cup of coffee. He looked at the papers. "You still handle all this yourself?" I smiled. "I always have." He sat down. "Wouldn't it be easier if Amanda managed everything?" I looked up. "What do you mean?" "You know, the finances, property taxes, utilities, insurance." "I'm doing fine." "I'm sure you are." His smile never reached his eyes. "I'm just saying, Amanda understands these things." For the first time, irritation rose in my chest. "So do I." Brian leaned back. "No offense, Nicole." There was that tone again. Polite on the surface, dismissive underneath, like speaking to someone who couldn't keep up. When Amanda came home later that evening, Brian immediately repeated the conversation. Amanda laughed. "Mom refuses to let anyone help." I stared at both of them. "I didn't ask for help." Amanda sat beside me. "Mom, nobody's saying you're incapable." The fact that she said it made me wonder if that's exactly what they were saying. A few days later, I discovered something else. The Wi-Fi password no longer worked. After 20 minutes of frustration, I finally asked Brian. "Oh," he said casually. "I changed it." "You changed it?" "Security reasons." I waited. He didn't offer the new password. Eventually, I had to ask. He looked surprised, as if he hadn't considered I might need it. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, thinking about all the little things that had changed. The curtains, the photographs, the bills, the Wi-Fi, the conversations. None of them seemed important by themselves. But together, they created a feeling I couldn't ignore. I no longer felt like the owner of my own home. I felt like a guest being tolerated. The realization scared me. Not because I thought Amanda would hurt me, at least not yet. But because I could feel myself adapting, becoming smaller, keeping quiet to avoid conflict, accepting things I never would have accepted before. One afternoon, Grace Miller, my longtime neighbor, stopped by with a pie. We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Amanda came in halfway through our conversation. Grace smiled. "It's good Amanda's here helping you." Before I could answer, Amanda did. "We're trying to get things under control." Something about that sentence bothered me. Grace seemed to notice too. She glanced at me briefly, then changed the subject. After she left, I stood at the sink washing dishes. Amanda entered the kitchen. "Grace worries about you?" I frowned. "Why?" Amanda shrugged. "People notice you're getting older." The plate nearly slipped from my hands. I turned toward her. "I'm 67, Amanda, not 97. She laughed. "You know what I mean." No, I knew exactly what she meant. And for the first time, I wondered whether she realized how often she talked about my age. As if getting older automatically meant losing authority, losing judgment, losing ownership of my own life. That evening, I walked through the house after everyone went to bed. I touched the walls, the staircase railing James built himself, the kitchen counter where Amanda used to sit swinging her legs, the doorway where we marked her height every birthday. This house wasn't just property. It was history. And standing there in the dark, I suddenly understood something I had been trying very hard not to see. Amanda and Brian weren't behaving like grateful guests anymore. They were behaving like future owners, and somehow, without ever asking my permission, they had already started acting as if I was the one living in their house. The first time Amanda asked me to sign paperwork, she made it sound like an act of love. Looking back, that was what frightened me most. Not the papers themselves, not Brian, not even the possibility that something illegal was happening. It was how naturally my own daughter wrapped pressure inside concern. How easily she made manipulation sound like protection. The conversation happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished folding laundry when Amanda walked into the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of tea. That alone should have warned me something was coming. Amanda wasn't unkind, but she wasn't the type to casually bring tea and sit down for long conversations anymore. Not unless she wanted something. She placed a mug in front of me. "You've been tired lately." I smiled. "I'm 67. Tired comes free with the membership." She laughed. Then her expression became serious. "Mom, can we talk about something important?" Immediately, my stomach tightened. I had learned that important rarely meant good news. "Of course." Amanda folded her hands together. "What would happen if you had a medical emergency?" I frowned. "What do you mean? If you got sick? If you fell? If you ended up in a hospital and couldn't make decisions?" I shrugged. "I suppose you'd make them." "Exactly." She leaned forward. "That's why we should put some paperwork in place." I listened quietly. Amanda continued. "A power of attorney. Medical directives. A few documents that would make things easier if anything happened." On the surface, it sounded reasonable. Many people did those things. James and I had even discussed it years earlier. The problem wasn't what Amanda said. It was how determined she seemed. For nearly 20 minutes, she talked about worst-case scenarios. Hospital mistakes, identity theft, banks freezing accounts, government delays. Every example ended the same way. Someone older suffered because they had not prepared properly. Finally, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I just want to protect you." The words touched something vulnerable inside me. After James died, I often worried about being alone during an emergency. What if something happened? What if Amanda couldn't help because paperwork wasn't in place? Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being stubborn. A few days later, Brian came home carrying a thick black folder. He set it on the dining room table. "There we go," Amanda smiled. "See, easy." The folder contained dozens of pages, far more than I expected. I adjusted my reading glasses. "What exactly am I signing?" Brian sat beside me. His voice sounded patient, almost rehearsed. "Mostly routine things, such as medical authorization." He pointed to one page. "Emergency contact permissions." Another page. "Financial assistance if you're hospitalized." Another. "Insurance communication forms." I slowly turned the pages. Some looked familiar. Others did not. Several contained dense legal language. A few pages had colored sticky notes marking signature lines. The more I flipped through them, the more uncomfortable I became. "Why are there so many?" Amanda laughed softly. "Because lawyers make everything complicated." That answer didn't satisfy me. I continued reading. Halfway through the stack, I noticed something strange. One document had its title partially covered by another page. Only the bottom portion was visible. I couldn't read the entire heading. "What is this one?" Brian quickly reached over. "Oh, that's part of a property-related package." I looked at him. "A property package?" He smiled. "Nothing major." Then he immediately flipped to the next page. Something about that movement felt rushed, too rushed. For the first time, a small alarm sounded in my head. I looked toward Amanda. She was watching me carefully, waiting, not helping me understand, waiting for me to sign. Maybe I should have someone review these. The temperature in the room seemed to change. Amanda's smile disappeared. "You don't trust us." I blinked. "That's not what I said." "Then why would you need someone else?" "I just like understanding what I'm signing." Brian chuckled. "Nicole, nobody reads every page." "I do." The answer came out sharper than intended. Silence settled over the table. Amanda lowered her eyes. When she looked up again, tears were already forming. The sight shocked me. Amanda rarely cried. "Mom!" Her voice trembled. "We moved here because we're trying to rebuild our lives." I stared at her. "We've done everything we can to help you." "Amanda?" "No." She shook her head. "I just didn't think you'd assume we'd trick you." Instant guilt flooded my chest. I hated seeing my daughter cry. Always had. When she was 6, her tears could make me buy a toy we couldn't afford. When she was 16, they could make me forget an argument. Apparently, even at 42, they still worked. I reached across the table. "Honey, that's not what I meant." Amanda wiped her eyes. "Then please stop treating us like strangers." I looked down at the papers. Part of me still felt uncertain. Another part felt ashamed. What kind of mother suspected her own daughter? Eventually, I signed several documents. Not all of them, but enough. Amanda immediately brightened. Brian collected the pages almost too quickly, as if he had been worried I might change my mind. That bothered me. Yet I pushed the feeling aside, the way I had pushed aside so many uncomfortable feelings lately. A week passed, then another. Life returned to normal, or what passed for normal these days. Until one afternoon when the mail arrived. I was standing at the kitchen counter sorting envelopes. A grocery flyer, an electric bill, a church newsletter. Then I saw an official-looking envelope. The return address caught my attention immediately. Cedar County Clerk's office. My heart skipped. Why would the county clerk be contacting me? I turned the envelope over. Before I could open it, Amanda walked into the kitchen. The moment she saw the envelope, her face changed. Only for a second, but I saw it. A flash of something. Fear. Then it vanished. Oh. She reached for it casually. That's probably nothing. I held on to it. Nothing. County notices come all the time. Her smile looked forced. I'll check it later. Amanda extended her hand. I can take care of it. The request felt strange. Why? Because these government forms are confusing. I stared at her. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Amanda laughed. Mom, honestly. She gently pulled the envelope from my fingers. And to my surprise, I let her. I watched her walk out of the kitchen carrying it. Something inside me whispered that I should stop her. I didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image kept replaying in my head. Amanda grabbing the envelope. Amanda looking nervous. Amanda refusing to let me read it. Around midnight, I got up for a glass of water. As I passed the kitchen window, I noticed movement outside, the trash bin near the garage, a white corner of paper sticking out beneath the lid. I don't know why I walked over. Maybe instinct, maybe curiosity, maybe James watching over me from somewhere. I lifted the lid. Inside was torn paper, most of it useless. Junk mail, receipts, packaging. Then I saw part of the envelope. The county envelope. My pulse quickened. Amanda had thrown it away. Not filed it. Not shown it to me. Thrown it away. Carefully, I pulled out the largest piece. Most of the contents were missing, but one fragment remained attached. Only a few words survived. Recorded document. Property. Transfer. Owner. I stared at the torn paper. The world suddenly felt very quiet. Property. Transfer. Owner. None of those words belonged in a routine tax notice. My hands began trembling. The next morning, I said nothing. Amanda acted normal. Brian acted normal. I acted normal too. But inside, something had changed. For weeks, I had ignored warning signs, explained away strange behavior, accepted disrespect, questioned my own instincts. Not anymore. That afternoon, while Amanda was grocery shopping and Brian was out of the house, I searched the dining room cabinet where he kept important papers. I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for peace of mind. Instead, I found something much worse. Tucked beneath a stack of folders was a loose document. Only one page. It looked like a photocopy. Across the top, partially visible, were words that made my blood run cold. Quitclaim deed. I had no idea what the entire document said, but I knew one thing. I had never knowingly signed anything transferring ownership of my home. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself whether something was wrong. I knew it was. The only question left was how far Amanda and Brian had already gone. For 2 days after finding the words quitclaim deed in Brian's cabinet, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amanda standing at the dining room table crying while I signed those papers. I heard her voice. You don't trust us? The question sounded different now. Less like hurt, more like strategy. I hated myself for thinking that. A mother is supposed to believe the best about her child, but something inside me had finally awakened. And once you see a crack in a wall, you can't pretend it isn't there anymore. The following week, Amanda announced she wanted to host a dinner. Nothing formal, just a few friends, a couple from church, our neighbor, Grace Miller, some acquaintances from town. The moment she mentioned it, I felt uneasy. Not because of the guests, because Amanda had suddenly become obsessed with appearances. Everything had to look perfect. The house, the furniture, the yard, even me. 3 days before the dinner, she walked into the kitchen holding a blouse. "Mom, wear this Friday." I looked at it. It wasn't ugly, it simply wasn't mine. "I already have something to wear." Amanda smiled. "Trust me." I was getting tired of hearing those words. Trust me. Every problem seemed to begin there. Friday arrived cold and windy. I woke up early and started cooking. No matter how Amanda tried to modernize the house, people still expected my food. And honestly, cooking gave me comfort. The kitchen remained the one place where my hands still remembered exactly what to do. I made roasted chicken, green bean casserole, cornbread, mashed potatoes, and apple pie using the same recipe my mother taught me when I was 22. The smells filled the house. For a few hours, things almost felt normal again. Then Amanda came downstairs. She looked around the kitchen, the counters, the dishes, the mixing bowls, and frowned. "Mom." "What?" "You've made a mess." I looked around. I was cooking for 10 people. Of course, the kitchen looked used. "I'll clean after dinner," Amanda sighed. "You really don't think about presentation." The comment irritated me, but I said nothing. Recently, every conversation seemed to become an argument. By 6 o'clock, guests began arriving. Grace Miller arrived first. She hugged me warmly. "You look tired, Nicole." I laughed. "That's what happens when you're old enough to remember cassette tapes." Grace chuckled, then lowered her voice. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. For a moment, I almost told her. About the paperwork, about the county letter, about the strange feeling growing inside me. But Amanda appeared beside us before I could answer. "Everything's wonderful." Her smile was flawless, too flawless. The rest of the guests arrived shortly afterward. Amanda floated through the room like a real estate agent showing a property. Every conversation somehow returned to the house. The renovations, the improvements, the upgrades, the future plans. At one point, I overheard her speaking to another woman from church. "We've really transformed the place." "We've." The word landed heavily in my chest. Not Mom transformed the place. Not my parents built this home. We've transformed it. As though decades of memories began the day Amanda moved back in. Dinner started pleasantly enough. People complimented the food. Grace praised the pie. The pastor's wife asked for my casserole recipe. For a little while, I relaxed. Then Brian opened his mouth. "Nicole still thinks she runs this kitchen." A few guests laughed politely. I forced a smile. Brian took a sip of wine. "She's stubborn." Amanda grinned. "Oh, that's an understatement." More laughter. Something about the exchange felt wrong. Not playful, not affectionate. Dismissive. Like two people discussing an elderly relative who wasn't sitting right there beside them. I focused on cutting my chicken. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe I was imagining things. Then Grace spoke. "I think Nicole's done a wonderful job with this home." For a second, I felt grateful. Someone else saw it. Someone else remembered. Amanda immediately jumped in. "Well, we're trying to bring it into this century." The room became quiet. Not uncomfortable yet, just quieter. I noticed Grace glance at me. The same way she had been doing lately. Like she sensed something beneath the surface. Later, while dessert was being served, one of Amanda's friends admired the dining room. "This place must be worth a fortune now." Amanda laughed. "That's what I've been saying." I looked up. The woman turned toward me. "Have you lived here long?" Before I could answer, Amanda did. "Almost 40 years. The woman smiled. "You must love it." "I do," I said. Amanda took another sip of wine. "She's attached to everything." Something in her voice made me uneasy. The woman laughed. I suppose that's normal. Amanda leaned back in her chair. You'd be surprised. There was that tone again. The one that made me feel smaller every time I heard it. A few minutes later, conversation shifted toward home renovations. Brian immediately became animated, talking about property values, market trends, refinancing, equity. Every sentence sounded less like casual conversation and more like a sales presentation. Then, someone asked the question that changed everything. Grace? Of course it was Grace. She looked around the room and smiled. So, what happens after Brian gets back on his feet? Amanda blinked. What do you mean? You two moved in temporarily, right? The room suddenly felt very still. I looked at Amanda. Amanda looked at Brian. Brian looked at his wine glass. For the first time all evening, nobody smiled. Then Amanda answered. We haven't really decided. A strange feeling settled over me. Because until that moment, I had assumed they planned to leave. Maybe not soon, but eventually. Hearing Amanda say it aloud made me realize she wasn't thinking that way at all. Grace seemed to notice the tension. She quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. The question lingered in the room. What happens next? That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind cleaning dishes. Amanda and Brian disappeared upstairs. The house finally became quiet. I stood alone at the sink, staring into the dark backyard. The conversation replayed in my mind. The jokes. The comments. The way Amanda kept speaking as if the house already belonged to her. The way Brian discussed property value more than family. The way neither of them answered Grace's simple question. Eventually, I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward the hallway. That was when I noticed something. The closet door near the dining room was slightly open. Inside sat several storage boxes. One box should have been on the top shelf. James's document box. The box that contained years of records, property taxes, mortgage documents, insurance paperwork, copies of deeds. I froze. The shelf was empty. My pulse quickened. I turned on the closet light, looked again. Nothing. The box was gone. Completely gone. At first, I thought maybe I had moved it. Maybe Amanda had reorganized the closet. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. I searched the basement, the garage, the attic, the laundry room. Nothing. The box had vanished. A cold sensation spread through my body. Because unlike the photographs and decorations Amanda had moved before, this wasn't sentimental clutter. These were legal records, important records, exactly the kind of records someone might want hidden if they were trying to control a house. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where James used to drink coffee every morning. For a long time, I stared at the empty chair across from me. Then, unexpectedly, a memory surfaced. A conversation from years ago. James had been sorting paperwork one evening. I remembered asking why he kept so many copies. He smiled and tapped the folder. Because paperwork tells the truth after people stop telling it. At the time, I laughed. Now I understood. The missing box wasn't an accident. Someone wanted those papers gone. And suddenly, another memory surfaced. Much older. Only a few months before James died. We had been sitting together in this very kitchen. He had looked unusually serious. If anything ever feels wrong about this house, Nicole, I could hear his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me. Don't argue with people first. I swallowed hard. Go to the county office. I sat motionless, my heart pounding, because for the first time I realized James hadn't said that casually. He had said it for a reason. And whatever reason he had, I was about to find out. I waited 3 days before going to the county office. 3 long days of pretending everything was normal. 3 days of smiling at Amanda over breakfast. 3 days of listening to Brian discuss home values as if he were already planning my future. 3 days of carrying a knot in my stomach so tight it felt like I had swallowed a stone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not Amanda, not Brian, not even Grace. Something deep inside me said that if I spoke too soon, whatever truth I was about to uncover might disappear before I reached it. So, on Thursday morning, I told Amanda I had a doctor's appointment. She barely looked up from her phone. "What time?" "10." She nodded. "Okay." For a moment, I studied her face. My daughter. The little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. The teenager who cried when her first boyfriend broke her heart. The young woman whose college acceptance letter still lived in my memory like a photograph. I searched for that girl in front of me. But lately, every time I looked, she seemed farther away. At 9:30, I left the house carrying my purse and a folder. Inside were the only pieces of evidence I had. The torn county envelope. The partial document I found in Brian's cabinet. Copies of old tax records. And a growing fear that I wasn't imagining any of this. The Cedar County Clerk's office sat in an old brick building near the courthouse square. I had passed it hundreds of times over the years, yet I couldn't remember ever going inside. The building smelled faintly of paper coffee and old wood. Everything seemed quiet, orderly, permanent, the opposite of how my life felt lately. A woman at the front desk greeted me. "Can I help you?" I swallowed. "I hope so." 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from a woman named Linda Whitmore. She appeared to be in her early 60s, professional, calm, the kind of person who looked like she had spent her entire career dealing with facts rather than emotions. She wore reading glasses and carried herself with quiet confidence. "Mrs. Wright," I nodded. "Nicole Wright." Linda glanced at her computer, then her expression softened slightly. "I remember that name." I blinked. "You do? Your family's property has been in our records for decades." Something about hearing those words made me unexpectedly emotional. For decades. Long before Amanda started talking about renovations. Long before Brian started inspecting paperwork. Long before any of this. Linda folded her hands. "What can I do for you today?" I placed the torn envelope on her desk, then the photocopied page, then my tax records. "I think something may be wrong." She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The missing document box, the strange paperwork, the county letter, the quitclaim deed, Amanda taking my mail, Brian's interest in property records. When I finished, Linda remained silent for a moment. Then she turned toward her computer. "Let's take a look." The next several minutes felt endless. Keys clicked, files opened, records appeared on her screen. I watched her face carefully. At first, there was no reaction. Then her eyes narrowed. A few moments later, her posture changed. That frightened me more than anything. Professionals only change posture when they find something important. "What is it?" I asked. Linda didn't answer immediately. Instead, she clicked through several more records. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Wright." My heart pounded. "Please, just tell me." Linda turned the monitor slightly. "There is a recently recorded quitclaim deed associated with your property." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The words felt heavier spoken aloud. Not suspicion, not theory, reality. There really was a deed. There really was paperwork. There really was something happening behind my back. "Recorded?" Linda nodded. Yes. I stared at the screen, the document number, the filing date, the property address, my home. My hands began shaking. What does it say? Linda adjusted her glasses. It appears to transfer ownership interests from Nicole Wright to Amanda Parker. The room spun. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. Amanda Parker, my daughter, my own daughter. Not a stranger, not a scammer, not a thief breaking into my house. Amanda. I gripped the edge of the desk. I never agreed to that. Linda's expression remained careful. I understand. No. My voice cracked. You don't understand. Tears burned behind my eyes. I never gave her my house. Linda handed me a tissue, then spoke gently. That's why we're looking into this. I took a deep breath, forced myself to focus. What happens now? Linda opened the digital copy. We need to determine whether this filing is valid. I stared at the signature section. There it was. My name, Nicole Wright, written in cursive. At first glance, it looked like my signature, but the longer I stared, the stranger it felt. The letters were close. Very close. Yet something seemed wrong. Like a copy of a photograph that's been duplicated too many times. Similar, but not identical. Linda noticed my expression. Do you believe that's your signature? I don't know. The answer embarrassed me. I should have known, but Amanda had placed so many papers in front of me, so many pages, so many signatures. Suddenly, I wasn't sure. Linda zoomed in further. There are a few concerns. My head lifted. What concerns? The signature is one. Hope flickered. What else? She pointed to another section. The notarization. I frowned. The what? The notary. Linda clicked another file. This document was notarized by an individual who has been involved in several disputed filings. My pulse quickened. Disputed? Linda chose her words carefully. Let's just say there have been questions. Questions. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. Enough to make me realize I wasn't crazy. Enough to make me realize this wasn't simply a misunderstanding. Then Linda found something else. Something neither of us expected. She opened an older record. Far older. Several decades old. Her eyebrows lifted. What? Linda turned back toward me. Tell me about the property itself. I blinked. The property? The land. I frowned. What about it? She clicked again. There appears to be a separate historical record attached to the original parcel. I stared at her. I don't understand. Linda studied the screen. The land itself may have originated as a family transfer. My heart skipped. Family transfer. Suddenly, an old memory surfaced. My father. A conversation decades earlier. A document signed before James and I ever married. The memory was blurry, but it was there. Linda continued. If these records are accurate, part of the property's ownership history predates your marriage. I sat completely still, because Amanda and Brian probably didn't know that. I barely remembered it myself. Linda looked thoughtful. There may be additional documentation somewhere. Somewhere. A strange image flashed through my mind. James, sitting at the kitchen table, sorting papers, labeling folders, saving copies of everything. Paperwork tells the truth after people stop telling it. The words echoed inside my head. Linda printed several documents and handed them to me. For now, don't sign anything else. I nodded immediately. Don't surrender any original records. Another nod. And if you have older paperwork, find it. I looked at the pages in my hands. For the first time in weeks, fear wasn't the strongest thing I felt. Determination was. Because this was no longer just about suspicion. Now I knew there was a real filing, a real transfer attempt, a real threat. As I stood to leave, Linda spoke one final sentence. One sentence that followed me all the way back to the parking lot. Mrs. Wright, if someone believed this property was theirs already, they might act very confidently. I stopped, slowly turned toward her. What do you mean? Linda held my gaze. I mean, people tend to reveal their intentions when they think they've already won. The drive home felt different. The house appeared exactly the same when I pulled into the driveway. Same porch, same windows, same maple tree. Yet everything had changed. Because now I knew something Amanda didn't. The story wasn't over. Not even close. And somewhere inside that house, hidden among years of memories and missing records, there was evidence. Evidence James had protected. Evidence Amanda and Brian hadn't found. Evidence that might determine who truly owned my home. As I stepped through the front door, Amanda called from the living room. How was your appointment? I looked at my daughter, then at Brian. For the first time, I saw them not as family members needing help, but as people hiding something. I smiled. Fine. And for the first time in months, I lied. Because until I found the rest of the truth, they didn't need to know I had started looking. The hardest part wasn't pretending I knew nothing. The hardest part was looking at Amanda every day and wondering when she had stopped being my daughter and started becoming someone I didn't recognize. For the next week, I said nothing about the county office, nothing about the quitclaim deed, nothing about the suspicious notarization, nothing about the property records. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I listened. And I watched. People reveal more when they think you're harmless. Linda Whitmore's words stayed with me. People tend to reveal their intentions when they think they've already won. Amanda and Brian certainly seemed confident. Too confident. The change became obvious once I started paying attention. They no longer acted like guests. They acted like managers. One evening, I came downstairs and discovered Amanda rearranging the living room. Again. The couch had been moved, the chairs relocated. Several family photographs were missing. I stood in the doorway. What happened? Amanda barely looked up. The flow was wrong. The flow. Interior design. I stared at the room. Nothing about it felt like my home anymore. It looked staged, cold, perfect. The way a house looks before someone sells it. That thought made my stomach tighten. Sells it? The idea felt ridiculous. Yet not as ridiculous as it would have sounded a month earlier. The following afternoon, another strange thing happened. I was watering flowers near the front porch when a black SUV pulled into the driveway. A man in a suit stepped out. He wasn't from the church. He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't family. I had never seen him before. Before I could introduce myself, Brian emerged from the garage. The two men shook hands immediately, not the handshake of strangers. The handshake of people who had met before. I stayed near the flower bed, pretending to trim leaves. The man glanced at the house, then toward the backyard, then toward the roof. Brian pointed at several areas while talking. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Square footage, comparable properties, market value, potential. My pulse quickened. Potential. There was that word again, the same word Brian had used the day he arrived. After 20 minutes, the man left. I walked into the garage. Who was that? Brian looked surprised to see me. Oh. He wiped his hands on a rag. Just someone I know. Someone you know? A business contact? I waited. He offered nothing else. Normally, I would have let it go. Not anymore. What kind of business? Brian's smile appeared. The same careful smile he always used when avoiding the truth. Real estate. A chill ran through me. Real estate? Relax. He laughed. It wasn't about your house. The fact that he immediately mentioned my house without me asking told me everything. That night, I called Grace. Not because I wanted advice, because I needed someone to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. We met for coffee the next morning. Grace listened quietly while I described everything. Not everything. I still wasn't ready to tell her about the deed. But enough. The missing papers, the stranger, the changes, the comments, the growing feeling that something was very wrong. When I finished, Grace stirred her coffee slowly. Then she said something unexpected. I noticed it too. I looked up. You did? Grace nodded. For months. My heart skipped. Months? Nicole, every time Amanda talks about the house, she talks like it's already hers. Hearing someone else say it made the truth feel heavier, more real. Grace leaned forward. I didn't want to interfere. You should have. She gave me a sad smile. Mothers don't usually want people criticizing their children. She wasn't wrong. For years, I had defended Amanda, even when she didn't deserve it. Especially when she didn't deserve it. Grace reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Whatever is happening, don't ignore it. I promised I wouldn't. By the time I returned home, Amanda was in the kitchen. Her expression changed the moment she saw me. Not dramatically, just enough. Where were you? The question surprised me. It sounded less like curiosity, more like monitoring. Coffee with Grace. Amanda nodded, then casually asked, You didn't happen to stop anywhere else? A warning bell rang in my head. No. She studied my face, then smiled. For the first time, I realized she was checking. Checking whether I knew something. Checking whether I had discovered anything. Checking whether her secret was still safe. That realization changed everything. The next few days became a silent game. Amanda watching me watching Amanda, neither of us acknowledging it. Then something happened that shifted the balance. On Sunday afternoon, Brian left his laptop open. Completely by accident. At least I think it was an accident. He had gone outside to take a phone call. Amanda was upstairs. I was carrying folded laundry through the dining room when I noticed the screen. At first I kept walking. Then a familiar word caught my eye. Property. I stopped. Slowly turned around. The screen displayed an email. Most of it was too small to read. But one sentence stood out. Once the ownership issue is finalized. Ownership issue. My heart began pounding. I moved closer. Not touching anything, just reading. The sender's name appeared at the top. A real estate investment company. The message continued. Expected listing value. Listing. The word struck me like a punch. Listing. People list houses when they intend to sell them. My house. The house Amanda supposedly moved into temporarily. The house James and I spent nearly 40 years paying for. Footsteps sounded upstairs. I immediately walked away. By the time Amanda entered the room, I was folding towels, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. That evening, I locked myself in my bedroom. For hours, I sat beside the window, looking at old family photographs. One picture in particular held my attention. Amanda at age 12, standing beside James in the backyard, both covered in dirt after planting flowers. They were smiling, happy, connected, real. I traced the edge of the photograph. Where had that girl gone? The question hurt more than anything else. Not the paperwork, not the lies, not even the possibility of losing my home, losing Amanda. That was the real heartbreak. Because part of me still wanted an explanation, a misunderstanding, some reason that would make all of this less ugly. But every day brought new evidence, and every piece pointed in the same direction. Amanda wasn't being manipulated. Amanda was participating. A few days later, another breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. I was cleaning the basement when I discovered an old metal toolbox, James's toolbox. It had been pushed behind storage shelves years ago. I almost ignored it. Then I remembered Linda's advice. Find older paperwork. So I opened it. Inside were tools, receipts, old instruction manuals, nothing important. Then I noticed something taped underneath the lid, a small yellow envelope. My name was written on the front. Nicole. My breath caught. Slowly, I removed it. The handwriting was unmistakable. James's. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded note, only a few sentences long. The paper had clearly been there for years. I unfolded it carefully and read, Nicole, if you're reading this, something has probably happened that made you start asking questions. Go to the cedar chest in the attic. Look beneath the false bottom. Everything important is there. Trust the documents, not the stories. Love, always James. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The basement seemed to disappear around me. All I could see was James's handwriting. All I could hear was his voice. Trust the documents, not the stories. The exact lesson he had repeated throughout our marriage. A chill moved through my body, because James had anticipated this. Maybe not every detail, maybe not Amanda, but something, some possibility, some risk involving the property. Otherwise, he never would have hidden that note, never would have left instructions, never would have prepared evidence. I carefully folded the paper, then looked toward the basement stairs. Above me sat the attic, and somewhere inside that attic was a cedar chest I hadn't opened in years, a cedar chest containing answers, maybe the answers. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope, real hope, because Amanda and Brian believed they had already found every important document. They believed they controlled the story, but if James had hidden evidence where nobody knew to look, then the truth might still be waiting for me. And I intended to find it before Amanda realized I was no longer playing the role she had assigned me. I waited until nearly midnight before going into the attic. Amanda and Brian were asleep. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling in the summer heat. For years, those sounds had comforted me. Tonight, they felt like warnings. I held James's note tightly in my hand as I climbed the pull-down ladder. The attic smelled exactly as I remembered. Dust, cedar, old cardboard, time itself. My flashlight cut through the darkness as I stepped carefully between storage boxes and forgotten furniture. Somewhere in that attic sat the cedar chest James had mentioned. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. Not since the Christmas decorations became too heavy for me to manage alone. After several minutes, I found it. The chest sat beneath a small window covered in dust. I knelt beside it. For a moment, I simply rested my hand on the lid. My heart hurt unexpectedly. Because this felt like a conversation with James, one he had started years ago, one I was only now hearing. Slowly, I opened the chest. Inside were old blankets, Christmas ornaments, family photo albums, a few baby clothes Amanda had worn as an infant. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained the note. Then I remembered James's exact words. Look beneath the false bottom. False bottom. I carefully removed the contents. The chest became lighter. Eventually, I noticed something. A thin wooden panel near the base. Almost invisible, unless you knew to look for it. My pulse quickened. I lifted the panel and froze. Beneath it sat a thick manila envelope, several sealed folders, and a metal document case. For a long moment, I simply stared. James had hidden all of this, all these years, not because he distrusted me, because he wanted to protect me. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of property records, tax documents, mortgage records, survey maps, transfer documents. Some dated back nearly 40 years. Others were even older. One document immediately caught my attention. It contained my father's name. I sat down on the attic floor and began reading, as memories slowly returned. When I was 24, my parents had transferred a parcel of land to me. Not to James, not jointly, to me. At the time, the land was mostly undeveloped. Years later, James and I built our home there. Somehow, I had forgotten how important that detail might become. Life has a way of burying legal memories beneath everyday responsibilities. But now, seeing the paperwork in front of me, I understood why Linda had become interested. The property history was more complicated than Amanda and Brian realized. Much more complicated. I continued searching. The second folder contained something even more surprising. An affidavit prepared by Edward Lawson, the attorney who had helped James and me decades earlier. I remembered him vaguely, a patient man with silver hair and thick glasses. The affidavit described ownership protections associated with the property. Several paragraphs were highlighted by James. As I read them, my breathing became uneven. The language was technical, but the meaning was clear. Any transfer involving the property required specific legal conditions. Conditions designed to protect me. Conditions that might not have been followed. I suddenly understood why James had kept copies hidden. He must have worried that someday someone could pressure me into signing something. The realization was heartbreaking, not because James doubted me, because he knew how much I loved Amanda and how dangerous that love could become if someone exploited it. Then I found the letter. A second letter, much longer than the first, addressed directly to me. Nicole. If you are reading this, then something has happened that forced you to question people you never wanted to question. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this envelope stays hidden forever. But if it doesn't, I need you to remember something. Being kind does not mean being helpless. Loving someone does not mean surrendering your judgment. And protecting your family does not require sacrificing yourself. The tears came immediately. I could barely continue. James's voice felt alive inside every sentence. He went on to explain why he had created multiple copies of important records, why he worked with Edward Lawson, why he insisted on documenting ownership history. Near the end, one paragraph was underlined. Nicole, if anyone ever tries to convince you that this home belongs to them more than it belongs to you, trust the records. Trust the facts. Trust yourself. I pressed the letter against my chest. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. The next morning, I made photocopies of everything. Then I hid the originals in a secure place Amanda would never think to search. The timing turned out to be fortunate, because Amanda's behavior changed dramatically over the following week. Almost as if she sensed time was running out. The conversations about assisted living became more frequent, more direct, more aggressive. One afternoon, she placed a glossy brochure in front of me during lunch. I looked down. Luxury senior living community. Private suites, dining services, medical support, social activities. I stared at the brochure, then at Amanda. "What is this?" Her smile appeared immediately. "Just information." "I didn't ask for information." "I know." She sat across from me. "But we should start planning." Planning. There was that word again. Always planning, always deciding, always managing. As if my future belonged to a committee. "I'm not moving." Amanda laughed softly. "Nobody said you're moving." The brochure between us said otherwise. Later that evening, Brian joined the conversation. He arrived home carrying another folder. My stomach tightened instantly. Folders no longer meant paperwork. They meant danger. Brian sat at the kitchen table, opened the folder, and slid several pages toward me. "We've been thinking." I didn't touch them. That seemed to surprise him. Amanda sat beside me. "We just want to help." The same phrase, again, always help, always protection, always concern, never honesty. I glanced down. One page contained floor plans. Another showed renovation estimates. A third listed projected property values. Property values. There it was, the truth hiding in plain sight. "What exactly am I looking at?" Brian smiled. "A transition plan." The phrase made my skin crawl. Transition, as though I were being relocated, reassigned, managed. Amanda pointed at the papers. "We could refinance the house." I felt ice spread through my chest. Refinance. The word Linda had warned me about. The word I had seen in Brian's emails. The word connected to everything. Amanda continued speaking. The kitchen, the upgrades, the loan, the improvements. I barely heard her, because for the first time, neither of them seemed interested in hiding their intentions. They thought they were close to controlling everything, close to winning, and confidence was making them careless. A few nights later, I accidentally overheard the conversation that changed everything. I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I walked downstairs for water. As I approached the kitchen, I heard voices coming from the back patio. Amanda and Brian, arguing. I stopped. Neither knew I was there. Brian sounded angry. "We need this done soon." Amanda lowered her voice. "She's getting suspicious." My entire body went still. Brian swore under his breath. "Then push harder." Amanda hesitated. "What if she refuses?" The silence that followed felt endless. Then Brian answered. "If she refuses, we'll have to prove she can't manage things herself." My blood turned cold. Amanda didn't immediately object. That hurt more than anything. Not Brian's words. Amanda's silence. Finally, she spoke. "That's extreme. We're out of options." "We don't know that." "Yes, we do." His voice hardened. "If we don't solve this, we're finished." Another long silence. Then Amanda asked the question I will never forget. "What would that look like?" I pressed my hand against the wall to stay upright, because she wasn't rejecting the idea. She was asking for details. Brian lowered his voice further. But I still heard enough. Confused, memory issues, inability to manage finances, medical evaluations, guardianship concerns, Every word felt like another knife, not just taking my home, taking my voice, my independence, my credibility, my entire identity. I quietly backed away before they could hear me, returned upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and sat awake until sunrise. The next morning, I looked at Amanda differently. Not with anger, not yet, with clarity. The illusion was finally gone. The daughter I loved was standing at a crossroads, and instead of protecting me from Brian's plans, she was considering joining them. But what Amanda didn't know was that I had something she hadn't expected. The documents, James's letter, the affidavit, the property history, and now a memory burned permanently into my mind. Because if this ever became a fight, I would remember exactly what I heard that night. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer preparing to defend my house. I was preparing to defend myself. After overhearing Amanda and Brian on the patio, I stopped doubting myself. For months, I had questioned my instincts. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe grief had made me suspicious. Maybe I was seeing danger where none existed. Not anymore. You don't accidentally discuss proving your mother incapable of managing her own affairs. You don't accidentally talk about guardianship. You don't accidentally plan someone's future without their knowledge. The conversation I heard that night removed every excuse I had been making for Amanda. But strangely, the anger didn't arrive immediately. What came first was sadness. A deep, aching sadness. The kind that settles into your bones. Because every time I looked at Amanda now, I saw two people. The woman standing in front of me, and the little girl she used to be. The gap between them felt unbearable. 3 days later, I met with Linda Whitmore again. This time, I brought everything. The hidden property records, the affidavit, James's letters, copies of the original land transfer documents from my father. Linda spent nearly an hour reviewing them. The longer she read, the more serious her expression became. Finally, she sat back. "Mrs. Wright?" I held my breath. These documents are extremely important. "Good important or bad important?" For the first time since we'd met, Linda smiled. "Good." Relief flooded through me. "Very good." I nearly cried. Linda organized several papers into separate piles. Whoever prepared that quitclaim filing clearly didn't expect these records to surface. I leaned forward. "What does that mean?" She tapped one document. "The original chain of ownership is much stronger than the later filing suggests." Another document. "The affidavit raises questions." Another. "And this letter from Attorney Lawson references protections that should have triggered additional review." My pulse quickened. "Are you saying the transfer isn't valid?" Linda chose her words carefully. "I'm saying there are serious issues." Serious issues, not a guarantee, but enough to weaken whatever Amanda and Brian thought they had accomplished. Then Linda asked a question I hadn't expected. "Do they know you found these?" "No." "Good." I frowned. "Why?" "Because people become unpredictable when they realize they're losing control." The sentence stayed with me. Losing control. For months, Amanda and Brian had controlled the story. The paperwork, the information, the conversations. Now that balance was shifting, and neither of them knew it yet. Before I left, Linda handed me the business card of a local attorney, a man named Richard Bennett. "Talk to him." I studied the card. "Is he good?" Linda smiled faintly. "He hates property fraud." For the first time in weeks, I laughed. The following Monday, I met Richard. He was exactly what I expected. Tall, gray-haired, direct. The kind of lawyer who looked annoyed by dishonesty on a personal level. His office walls were covered with framed legal certificates and photographs of fishing trips. After reviewing the documents, he removed his glasses and looked at me. "When did you first suspect something?" I told him everything. The papers, the missing records, the county notice, the conversations, the comments about my age, the discussion about guardianship. When I finished, Richard remained silent for several moments. Then he said something that startled me. "This wasn't spontaneous." I stared at him. Whatever happened here didn't begin recently." A cold feeling spread through my chest. Richard opened the file again. "The planning appears to go back months." Months, not weeks. Months, maybe longer. I suddenly remembered the missing photographs, the financial questions, the constant interest in ownership records, the strange confidence. Amanda and Brian hadn't suddenly developed these ideas. They had been working towards something, step by step, piece by piece, for a very long time. Richard pointed toward the disputed deed. "People don't usually arrive at this stage without preparation." I swallowed hard. "Do you think Amanda intended this from the beginning?" The question hurt to ask. Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked directly at me. "As your attorney, I focus on actions. Not emotions, not excuses. Actions. And Amanda's actions were becoming impossible to ignore. Before I left, Richard gave me advice. Simple advice, powerful advice. Don't confront them yet." That surprised me. "Why not?" "Because right now, they're comfortable." I immediately thought of Linda saying the same thing. "People reveal themselves when they think they've won." Richard continued, "The more comfortable they become, the more mistakes they'll make." When I returned home that afternoon, I found Amanda sitting at the kitchen table. The same kitchen where she would eventually call me a squatter. Though neither of us knew how close that moment was. She smiled when I entered. A bright, practiced smile. "How was your day?" I looked at her carefully. This woman knew how to lie to me now. That realization still hurt every time. "Fine." She nodded, then casually asked, "Did you go anywhere interesting?" The question sounded innocent, but I recognized it immediately. Fishing, checking, monitoring. "No." Amanda seemed relieved. That told me everything. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure increased. Subtly at first, then more openly. One afternoon, Amanda mentioned memory loss, completely out of nowhere. We were folding laundry, nothing more. Then suddenly she said, "Mom, have you ever worried about dementia?" I nearly dropped a towel. "No." She smiled. "A lot of people don't notice the signs." The comment sat between us like poison. A few days later, Brian mentioned a family friend whose finances had become too much for her to manage alone. Then another conversation about estate planning. Then another about aging. Then another about safety. The pattern became obvious. They were building a narrative, one conversation at a time, creating a version of Nicole Wright that sounded vulnerable, confused, dependent, someone who needed help, someone whose decisions should be questioned, someone easier to control. The worst part? They weren't doing it loudly. They were doing it gently, which made it even more dangerous. One Friday evening, Grace stopped by unexpectedly. Amanda happened to be in the room. After a few minutes of conversation, Grace looked at me and asked, "How are you really doing?" Before I could answer, Amanda did. "She's had some memory lapses." The room went silent. My head snapped toward her. "What?" Amanda looked surprised. You told me you forgot where you put your reading glasses. I stared at her. Reading glasses. One misplaced pair of glasses. That was the evidence. Grace's expression darkened. She wasn't fooled, not for a second. Amanda continued speaking. And she repeats herself sometimes. I felt heat rise in my chest. Everyone repeats themselves sometimes, especially people who live together. Grace calmly changed the subject, but after Amanda left the room, she leaned closer. Be careful. Only 2 words, yet they carried the weight of everything neither of us wanted to say aloud. Then came the incident with the bank. The event that convinced me Amanda and Brian were accelerating their plans. I received a call from my bank manager, a woman named Denise Harper. She sounded confused. Mrs. Wright, I wanted to verify a request. My stomach tightened immediately.
What request? Silence.
Then Denise answered. Someone contacted us asking about account authority documentation. Every nerve in my body went alert. Who? I'm not sure I'm allowed to say. The answer told me enough. Amanda, or Brian, or both. I thanked her and ended the call. Then sat motionless at the kitchen table. Because now they weren't just targeting the house. They were testing access to my finances, my independence, my future, everything. That night, I went upstairs and opened James's letter again. I must have read it 20 times already. Yet one sentence continued pulling at me. Being kind does not mean being helpless. I repeated the words aloud, again and again, until they finally felt true. Because for too long, I had mistaken silence for kindness, avoidance for kindness, surrender for kindness. They weren't the same thing. Protecting myself wasn't cruelty. Telling the truth wasn't betrayal. Holding people accountable wasn't unloving, especially when those people were trying to erase me. The next morning, Richard Bennett called. His voice sounded unusually serious. Nicole? My heart immediately accelerated. What happened? We found something. I gripped the phone tighter. What? A brief pause. Then Richard spoke. The county clerk's office uncovered additional filing activity connected to your property. I froze. Additional filing activity. The words sounded dangerous. What kind of activity? Richard exhaled slowly. The kind that suggests Amanda and Brian may have believed they were much closer to ownership than anyone realized. My stomach dropped, because whatever he had found, it was important enough to make a lawyer call immediately, and for the first time I began to understand something terrifying. Amanda and Brian weren't just preparing for a future where I left the house. They had already started behaving as if I was gone. Richard Bennett asked me to come to his office the next morning. The urgency in his voice kept me awake most of the night. I sat at my kitchen table long after Amanda and Brian had gone to bed, staring at James's empty chair. For years, that chair had reminded me of what I lost. Now it reminded me of what I still had, the truth. And for the first time, the truth seemed to be moving faster than Amanda and Brian expected. The next morning, I arrived at Richard's office carrying a folder filled with documents. Richard was already waiting. Several files sat open across his desk. He looked unusually focused. That immediately made me nervous. What did you find? Richard removed his glasses. Something significant. I sat down. My hands were already trembling. Richard slid a document toward me. The page contained filing information from the county records office. I didn't understand most of it, but one date caught my attention. 3 months earlier. 3 months. I frowned. What am I looking at? Richard folded his hands. This filing appears to indicate preliminary preparations connected to the property. The room suddenly felt smaller. Preparations? Yes. For what? Richard's expression hardened. Potential transfer and financing activity. I stared at him. Transfer. Financing. The exact words Amanda and Brian kept dancing around. The exact words showing up everywhere. The exact words connected to every strange event of the past several months. Richard continued. Based on timing, it appears discussions began well before you discovered anything. A cold sensation spread through my chest. I thought back. 3 months earlier. That was before Amanda started talking about assisted living. Before the brochure. Before the county letter. Before most of the obvious warning signs. Meaning the planning had already been underway. Quietly. Carefully. Behind my back. What does that mean legally? Richard leaned back. It means the timeline matters. I nodded slowly. And the timeline doesn't support the idea that this was done to protect you. The words landed heavily because Amanda always used the same excuse. Concern, safety, protection. Everything she did supposedly came from love. Yet the timeline told a different story. A story that started long before anyone claimed I needed help. Richard reached for another folder. What I'm seeing looks more like a strategy. Strategy. Not concern. Not protection. Strategy. The distinction broke something inside me. Even after everything, some small part of me had continued searching for an innocent explanation. Now that part was dying. Then Richard showed me the second discovery. This one shocked me even more. An appraisal inquiry, not a completed appraisal. An inquiry, made weeks earlier, connected to my property. My pulse accelerated. Why would someone request that? Richard looked directly at me. Usually because they're evaluating future options. Future options, selling, refinancing, borrowing, ownership changes. Every possibility led back to the same conclusion. Amanda and Brian were planning something far beyond temporary housing. They had a vision for my house. And it didn't include me making the decisions. When I finally left Richard's office, I sat in my car for nearly 15 minutes, unable to start the engine, unable to think clearly. The betrayal felt different now. Larger, more deliberate, not an emotional mistake, not a moment of weakness, a process, months of choices, months of planning, months of deception. I drove home slowly. When I arrived, Amanda was standing in the front yard, talking to someone. A woman I didn't recognize. The woman carried a clipboard. Immediately, my stomach tightened. The conversation stopped the moment Amanda saw me. Too quickly. Much too quickly. Amanda smiled. Hi, Mom. The woman smiled too. Professional, polite, uncomfortable. I stepped closer. Who's this? Amanda answered immediately. A friend. The woman looked surprised. Friend? She clearly wasn't a friend, not the way Amanda described her. The clipboard alone told me that. The woman extended her hand. Nice to meet you. I shook it. Her grip felt uncertain, as if she suddenly wished she were somewhere else. What do you do? I asked. Before she could answer, Amanda interrupted. She was just leaving. And just like that, the woman walked away. I watched her drive off. Then looked at Amanda. Amanda refused to meet my eyes. That told me everything. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, but tension filled every room. I could feel Amanda watching me, evaluating me, measuring my reactions. The same way I was measuring hers. That evening, another unexpected visitor arrived. Grace. She knocked on the back door carrying a casserole dish. Her usual excuse for checking on me. I invited her inside. Amanda and Brian happened to be upstairs. For once, we had privacy. The moment we sat down, Grace leaned forward. Something happened. I blinked. What? Grace lowered her voice. I heard a conversation. My pulse quickened. What kind of conversation? Grace looked genuinely uncomfortable. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Grace, she sighed. I was at the pharmacy. I waited. And I saw Brian. Immediately, my stomach tightened. He was talking to someone. Who? I don't know. Grace hesitated. But I heard part of it. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. What did he say? Grace swallowed. Something about timing. My chest tightened. Timing? She nodded. And paperwork. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. Paperwork. Always paperwork. Grace continued. He said something like... She paused, trying to remember. Once the county issue is resolved. The county issue? The county issue. Not misunderstanding. Not confusion. Not concern. An issue. Something standing in the way. Something preventing them from getting what they wanted. I felt sick. Grace reached across the table. Nicole? I looked up. You need to be careful. I nodded slowly. I know. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Not even for me. The following week brought another development. One I never expected. Linda Whitmore called. Directly. Her voice sounded unusually serious. Mrs. Wright, are you available to come in tomorrow? Immediately my pulse accelerated. Why? A brief pause. Then Linda answered. We found additional documentation. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind? I'd rather discuss it in person. That answer frightened me, because people only say that when the information matters. The next day, I met her again. Linda closed the office door behind me, then handed me a file. I opened it. Inside sat copies of correspondence related to the disputed filing. Several pages, several names, several signatures. Then I saw something unexpected. One name appeared repeatedly. A notary. The same notary Linda had questioned before. I looked up. What am I missing? Linda folded her hands. We've received multiple complaints involving documents processed by this individual. My heart skipped. Multiple complaints, not one. Multiple. The room seemed to tilt, because suddenly the situation felt much larger than my family. Larger than Amanda. Larger than Brian. Linda continued carefully. We're reviewing everything. Everything. For the first time, I sensed real concern in her voice. Professional concern. The kind that appears when a pattern emerges. I stared at the file. Amanda and Brian probably didn't know this. They probably thought everything had been completed successfully, that no one would ever question it, that no one would ever look closely. But now, people were looking. And the more people looked, the more fragile their story seemed to become. Before I left, Linda asked me one final question, a question I wasn't prepared for. If this becomes public, are you prepared for that? I froze. Public. The word echoed inside my head. Public meant neighbors, friends, church members, community, embarrassment, exposure, conflict. Everything I had spent my life avoiding. For several seconds, I couldn't answer. Then I thought about James, about the hidden documents, about Amanda discussing guardianship behind my back, about Brian talking to real estate contacts, about the missing records, about the lies. And finally, I nodded. Yes. Linda studied me carefully. You sound certain. For the first time in months, I was, because something had changed. I was no longer fighting to avoid conflict. I was fighting to preserve the truth. And those were very different things. When I returned home that evening, Amanda was waiting in the kitchen. The moment I walked through the door, she stood up, almost as if she had been counting the minutes until I returned. Mom. I looked at her calmly. Yes. Amanda hesitated, then forced a smile. We need to talk. Something in her voice made every alarm inside me activate, because whatever conversation Amanda had planned, she wasn't asking anymore. She was preparing to tell me something. And judging by her expression, she believed I wasn't going to like it. Amanda stood in the kitchen with her arms folded across her chest. The moment I walked through the door, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. Something had changed. Not in me, in her. For months, Amanda had hidden her intentions behind smiles and concern. Now there was impatience in her eyes, frustration, pressure, as if whatever timeline she and Brian were following was slipping away. We need to talk, she repeated. I placed my purse on the counter. About what? Amanda pulled out a chair. Sit down. The request sounded more like an instruction. I sat anyway. She took the chair across from me, the same chair where James used to drink coffee every morning. The sight alone irritated me. Amanda leaned forward. I've been thinking a lot about your future. There it was. My future. Not my opinion, not my wishes. My future. As though it belonged to her. I remained silent. Amanda took that as permission to continue. This house is becoming too much for you. I felt my jaw tighten. No, it isn't. She ignored me. The maintenance. Amanda. The stairs. I'm managing just fine. The yard. I stared at her. Amanda sighed dramatically. Mom, why do you fight everything? Fight everything. The words almost made me laugh. For months, I had done the opposite. I had tolerated, compromised, stayed quiet. Yet somehow I was the difficult one. What exactly are you asking? Amanda hesitated, then finally said it. I think it's time to consider moving. The sentence hung in the air, heavy, permanent, ugly. There it was. No more brochures, no more suggestions, no more hints. The truth. I looked directly at my daughter. And where would I move? Amanda's expression brightened slightly, as if she had been waiting for that question. We found a beautiful assisted living community. Found, not researched, found. As if the decision had already been made. My stomach twisted. I told you before, Amanda sighed. I know. No. I sat straighter. I told you I wasn't moving. Her smile disappeared. For a brief moment, something cold appeared beneath it, a glimpse of the woman she had become. Then it vanished. You're being emotional. Emotional. The word hit me harder than I expected, because women my age know exactly what that word means. It means dismissing us, reducing us, explaining away our decisions. I looked at Amanda carefully. You think I'm emotional? She immediately softened her voice. That's not what I meant. It was exactly what she meant. We both knew it. Before either of us could continue, Brian walked into the kitchen. One glance at our faces told him he had arrived in the middle of something important. Everything okay? Amanda answered before I could. We're discussing options. Options. Another lie. Because they weren't discussing options, they were presenting decisions. Brian sat down beside her. His timing felt suspiciously perfect, as though they had planned this conversation together. I looked from one face to the other. Suddenly, I felt like an outsider at my own table. Brian folded his hands. Nicole. My skin crawled. He only used that tone when he wanted something. We care about you. There it was. The script. The same script. Concern. Protection. Care. Always care. Never honesty. I appreciate that. Brian smiled. Good. Then he continued. Because we need to start thinking practically. Practical. Another favorite word. Whenever someone wants to take control of your life, they suddenly become practical. I leaned back. What exactly does practical mean? Amanda answered. It means accepting reality. I almost laughed. The irony was unbelievable. Accepting reality. If only she knew how much reality I had uncovered. Brian opened a folder. Of course he did. Another folder. Another stack of papers. Another attempt to move pieces across a board they thought only they could see. He slid several documents toward me. I didn't touch them. What are those? Just information. The phrase sounded familiar, because Amanda had used it before, right before everything began. I looked at the top page. Transition planning. I felt anger stir for the first time. Not sadness, not disappointment, anger. Because they were treating me like a project. A problem. Something to be managed. Amanda pointed at the documents. If you move into assisted living, we can renovate the house. There it was. The truth. Hidden beneath everything else. The house. Always the house. I looked directly at her. What happens to the house? Amanda froze. Only for a second, but I saw it. Then she smiled. We'll take care of it. Take care of it. Not preserve it. Not protect it. Take care of it. The same way people take care of property they expect to own. The conversation continued for nearly 30 minutes. Every answer created more questions. Every explanation sounded rehearsed. Every concern somehow led back to control. By the time it ended, I was exhausted. But something else had happened. Amanda and Brian had become careless. Careless enough to reveal more than they intended. That evening, I called Richard Bennett. I described everything. The conversation, the documents, the pressure, the language they used. Richard listened quietly. When I finished, he spoke immediately. They're escalating. The certainty in his voice frightened me. What does that mean? It means they believe time is running out. I thought about Linda, about the county investigation, about the disputed filing, about the questions surrounding the notary. Richard continued. People become more aggressive when their plans start collapsing. I sat silently, because that explanation made perfect sense. Amanda wasn't growing more confident. She was growing desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. The next mistake arrived sooner than expected. 3 days later, Grace called me. Her voice sounded urgent. Nicole, what happened? I think you need to come over. Within 15 minutes, I was standing in Grace's living room. She handed me her phone. What am I looking at? A social media post. I frowned. Then I saw it. The photograph showed Amanda standing in my backyard, smiling. The caption made my stomach drop. Excited for the next chapter. Big changes coming soon. Below it sat dozens of comments. Congratulations, So happy for you. You deserve it. Can't wait to see what you do with the place. The place. My house. People believed Amanda owned it, or would own it soon. I looked up. When was this posted? Yesterday. I stared at the screen. Amanda wasn't just planning. She was creating expectations, building a public story. One where the outcome had already been decided. One where I barely existed. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because of strangers. Because Amanda was telling the world a future she hadn't earned. Grace squeezed my hand. You okay? I nodded, but it wasn't true. I wasn't okay. I was furious. Not loud fury, not explosive fury. Something colder, stronger. The kind of anger that finally arrives after months of betrayal. When I returned home, Amanda was sitting on the porch, scrolling through her phone, smiling, probably reading comments, probably enjoying congratulations, probably imagining a future that belonged to her. For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid, because I knew something Amanda didn't. The truth was getting closer. Richard was building a case. Linda was reviewing records. The county was asking questions. And somewhere beneath Amanda's confidence cracks were beginning to form. That weekend, Richard called again. His voice sounded different. Not concerned. Certain. Nicole! I immediately sat up straighter. What is it? We've finished reviewing everything. My pulse accelerated. And a brief pause. Then Richard delivered the words I had been waiting months to hear. The transfer isn't the strongest problem they have anymore. I frowned. What do you mean? Richard's voice hardened. Because we've uncovered evidence that suggests Amanda and Brian may have known the filing was questionable from the beginning. The room seemed to stop moving. Known. Not mistaken. Not confused. Known. And if Richard could prove that, everything was about to change. I sat in my bedroom long after Richard Bennett ended the call. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the floorboards James had installed with his own hands nearly 30 years earlier. Everything around me suddenly felt different. Not because the house had changed, because the illusion had. For months, I had been trying to understand Amanda's actions, trying to find explanations, trying to preserve the image of the daughter I loved. But Richard's words kept echoing inside my head. They may have known the filing was questionable from the beginning. Known. Not suspected. Not misunderstood. Known. If that was true, then Amanda hadn't simply made bad decisions. She had made deliberate ones, and that realization hurt more than anything else. The following Tuesday, Richard asked me to come to his office again. This time, when I arrived, Linda Whitmore was there too. The sight immediately made my stomach tighten. Seeing both of them together told me something significant had happened. Richard closed the conference room door. Linda placed several documents on the table. Then neither spoke for a moment. That silence frightened me. Finally, Richard broke it. We found the witness. I blinked. The witness? Linda nodded. The individual listed as present during part of the document execution process. My pulse accelerated. Someone had witnessed the paperwork. Someone connected to the deed. Someone who might know exactly what happened. What did they say? Richard exchanged a glance with Linda. Then he answered. They don't remember seeing you. The room seemed to tilt. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. What? The word barely came out. Linda opened a folder. The witness remembers Amanda. I stared at her. They remember Brian. Another pause. But they do not recall interacting with you. My heart pounded. That shouldn't have been possible. If I truly signed property transfer documents in front of witnesses, they should remember me, especially because I was the property owner, especially because the transfer involved my home. Richard leaned forward. Nicole, we still need facts. I nodded. I understood. But the implication was impossible to ignore. Something about the filing process wasn't matching the story Amanda and Brian wanted people to believe. Then Linda revealed another detail. The timeline doesn't fit. What timeline? The sequence of signatures. I frowned. Linda pointed at several dates. The documents appear to have been completed unusually quickly. I stared at the papers. Different signatures, different locations, different timestamps. The more Linda explained, the more uncomfortable the entire process sounded. Not impossible. Not illegal on its face. Just strange. Strange enough that professionals were asking questions. That afternoon, I drove home feeling emotionally exhausted. The road blurred beneath my tires. Not because I wasn't paying attention, because my mind was elsewhere. I kept remembering Amanda as a child, remembering birthdays, school plays, family vacations, Christmas mornings. All those memories fighting against the reality unfolding in front of me. The conflict was exhausting. When I arrived home, I immediately noticed something wrong. A moving truck, parked across the street. Not in my driveway. Across the street. At first I ignored it. Then I saw Brian standing outside talking to the driver. My stomach tightened. The truck wasn't loading furniture. The driver appeared to be discussing measurements, dimensions, access points. I parked the car and walked toward them. The conversation stopped immediately. Brian smiled, too quickly. Hey! I looked at the truck, then at him. What's this? Brian laughed. Nothing. Nothing. That word again. Everything suspicious in my life lately was apparently nothing. The driver awkwardly excused himself and walked away. I watched him go, then looked back at Brian. What was that about? Just asking questions. Questions. Always questions. Never answers. The moment Brian walked inside, I took out my phone. For the first time in my life, I photographed something because I thought I might need evidence later. The truck, the company logo, the license plate, everything. I hated that I felt compelled to do it, but I did it anyway. That evening, another confrontation arrived unexpectedly. Amanda found me sitting on the porch after dinner. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then she sat beside me. The silence felt uncomfortable, artificial, like two strangers trying to remember how they became family. Finally, Amanda sighed. Things have been tense lately. I almost laughed. Tense. That was certainly one word for it. She looked toward the yard. I don't want us fighting. The statement sounded sincere, and for one dangerous moment, I wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe my daughter was finally ready to tell the truth. Then she continued. We both want what's best. There it was again. The script. Always the script. I stared ahead. Do we... Amanda looked surprised. What does that mean? I turned toward her. What do you want, Amanda? The question caught her off guard. Not because it was difficult, because it was direct. For months, we had danced around the truth. Now I was standing closer to it than ever. Amanda hesitated, then smiled. The same careful smile, the same controlled smile, the same smile I no longer trusted. I want you to be safe. I nodded slowly. That's not what I asked. For the first time, Amanda's expression hardened, just slightly, but enough. Then she stood up. Conversation over. No answer, no honesty, no explanation, only retreat. And that told me more than words ever could. 2 days later, everything escalated. Grace called early in the morning. Her voice sounded alarmed. "Nicole, what happened? I think you need to see this." Within an hour, we were sitting together in her kitchen. She opened her laptop, then turned the screen toward me. My stomach dropped instantly. The image showed my house. My house, photographed from the front, listed among several comparable properties on a real estate analysis website. Not officially for sale, not yet, but included in valuation discussions. Market estimates, investment projections, potential listing ranges. My pulse began racing because someone had submitted information. Someone had provided details. Someone was evaluating the property. Grace looked furious. "I knew something was wrong." I stared at the screen, unable to speak, because suddenly every piece was connecting. The appraisals, the inquiries, the real estate contacts, the emails, the moving truck, the pressure, all of it. Not random, not disconnected. A plan. One large plan. And somewhere inside that plan, Amanda had decided her mother was an obstacle. The realization hurt more than I can describe. That evening, Richard called again. When I told him about the website, he wasn't surprised. That frightened me. "You expected this, possibly." The answer made my chest tighten. "What aren't you telling me?" Richard was silent for several seconds. Then he finally spoke. "We've been reviewing financial records connected to some of the activity." I gripped the phone. "And..." Richard exhaled. "We may be looking at more than a property dispute." A chill moved through my body. "What does that mean?" "It means there could be financial motivations larger than the house itself." The room suddenly felt cold. Larger than the house. For months, I had assumed the house was the prize. But what if it wasn't? What if the house was only the first step I sat down slowly? Because a terrifying possibility was beginning to form. Amanda and Brian weren't struggling financially. They were desperate financially. There was a difference. And desperate people take bigger risks. Richard continued. "We're still verifying everything." "But you found something?" Another pause, then one word. "Yes." That single word stayed with me all night. Because if financial pressure was driving all of this, then Amanda and Brian were running out of options. And people running out of options become dangerous. The next morning, I woke to voices downstairs. Loud voices, arguing. I immediately recognized them. Amanda and Brian. I moved quietly toward the staircase. Their words drifted upward from the kitchen. Fragments, broken pieces, but enough. "She's not cooperating." "You promised." "We don't have much time." Then I heard something crash. A glass. A plate. Something. Silence followed. Then Amanda said the sentence that made my blood run cold. "If this falls apart, everything falls apart." Everything. Not the house. Everything. And suddenly, I knew. Whatever Amanda and Brian had built their future on it was much bigger than my kitchen. Much bigger than my home. And whatever secret Richard was uncovering, it was getting dangerously close to the truth. I didn't sleep after hearing Amanda and Brian argue in the kitchen. "If this falls apart, everything falls apart." Amanda's words replayed in my head over and over. Everything. Not the house. Not a loan. Not a misunderstanding. Everything. Whatever they had built their future around it depended on my property. And now that future was beginning to collapse. The following morning, Richard Bennett called before 8 o'clock. His voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Nicole, can you come in today?" Immediately, my pulse quickened. "What happened?" "We received additional records." I sat upright in bed. "What kind of records?" A pause. Then Richard answered. "The kind that explain why they're desperate." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Finally, I whispered, "I'll be there in an hour." The drive to Richard's office felt longer than usual. Every red light seemed endless. Every minute felt stolen. By the time I arrived, Richard already had several files spread across his conference table. Linda Whitmore sat beside him. The moment I saw both of them again, I knew this wasn't good news. Or perhaps it was, depending on who you were. Richard motioned toward a chair. I sat. Neither spoke immediately. That silence alone told me how serious the situation had become. Finally, Richard slid a document toward me. "What do you know about Brian's business ventures?" I frowned. "Very little." That was the truth. Brian always talked about investments, projects, opportunities, but never specifics, never numbers, never details. Richard nodded. "That's what we thought." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" Richard exchanged a glance with Linda. Then he answered. "Brian has substantial debt." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Debt. The word itself wasn't shocking. Many people carry debt, but the way Richard said it made clear this wasn't ordinary debt. "How substantial?" Richard opened another file, then another, then another. Each one seemed thicker than the last. "Significant enough to create pressure." Pressure. I immediately thought about the arguments, the urgency, the timelines, the desperation. Everything began connecting. Linda spoke next. "Several obligations appear to have increased over the last year." I stared at the papers. For the first time, I could see the outline of the entire scheme. Not every detail, but enough. Amanda and Brian weren't trying to secure the house because they loved it. They needed it. Richard leaned forward. "We're still verifying numbers. But if our assessment is correct, your property's equity represented their solution." The sentence landed like a hammer. Solution, not inheritance, not family planning. A solution to a financial problem. A financial problem they created. I closed my eyes. For months, I had wondered why Amanda seemed so different. Now I understood. Fear, pressure, desperation. None of those excused her choices, but they explained them. Richard continued. "The house wasn't the goal." I looked up. What was the money connected to it? The truth hurt. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed everything I feared. My home had become an asset, a number, a rescue plan, a way out. And somewhere along the way, Amanda had stopped seeing it as her mother's home. That afternoon, I returned home feeling emotionally numb. The house looked peaceful, normal, almost beautiful. The maple tree swayed gently in the breeze. The porch swing moved slightly. Birds sang in the backyard. Nothing outside reflected the storm gathering inside. When I walked through the front door, Amanda was waiting. Again. She seemed to be doing that more often lately. Waiting, watching, monitoring. Her smile appeared immediately, but this time it looked strained, forced, nervous. "How was your day?" I studied her face. Dark circles beneath her eyes, tension around her mouth, tiny signs I would have missed months earlier. Now they stood out clearly. "Busy." Amanda nodded, then asked the question I expected. Did you go anywhere? There it was. The real question. Not where. Who? Did you meet Richard? Did you learn something? Do you know? I smiled politely. Just errands. Amanda visibly relaxed, and that reaction told me everything. She was afraid. For the first time since this nightmare began, Amanda was afraid. That evening, Brian barely spoke during dinner. He pushed food around his plate, checked his phone constantly, left the table twice to answer calls. Every sign pointed to stress, pressure. Something wasn't going according to plan. I watched quietly, listening, observing, the same way they had observed me for months. Then, around 9 o'clock, the breakthrough arrived, completely by accident, or perhaps fate. Brian left his phone on the kitchen counter while stepping outside. Normally, I never would have looked. Never. But Normal had disappeared months ago. The screen lit up. One message preview appeared. Only a few words. Yet enough. Need update ASAP. Lender won't wait forever. Lender. My breath caught. Not investor. Not partner. Lender. Debt. Richard was right. The pressure wasn't theoretical. It was real. And it was growing. I stepped away immediately. I didn't need to read more. That single sentence confirmed everything. The next morning brought another surprise. A certified letter arrived. For me. Directly. Amanda wasn't home when the mail came. For the first time in months, I received my own mail without interference. I carried the envelope inside. My hands trembled slightly. The return address belonged to Richard Bennett's office. I opened it immediately. Inside sat copies of legal filings, protective filings, preventative filings, documents designed to ensure no additional property actions could proceed without scrutiny. I felt an overwhelming wave of relief. For the first time, the house wasn't vulnerable. For the first time, someone had built a wall around the truth. Amanda returned home an hour later. The moment she saw the envelope on the table, her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. What is that? I looked down, then back at her. Mail. The answer sounded innocent. Amanda didn't smile. What kind of mail? I shrugged. Important mail. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Amanda quietly walked away. That silence told me she already knew, or suspected. Either way, she understood something was happening, something she couldn't control. That night, the tension inside the house became unbearable. Nobody talked. Nobody laughed. Nobody relaxed. 3 people sharing a home while living inside completely different realities. Then came the confrontation. Not the big one. Not yet. Just the beginning. Around 10 o'clock, Amanda knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it. She stood in the hallway looking exhausted. Older somehow. For a moment, she looked like my daughter again. Not the woman fighting me. Just Amanda. Can we talk? The sadness in her voice caught me off guard. I stepped aside. She entered, sat on the edge of my bed, and for nearly a minute said nothing. Finally, she whispered, "Do you trust me?" The question hit me harder than any accusation, because once upon a time, the answer would have been immediate, absolute, unquestioned. Now I couldn't answer at all. Amanda lowered her eyes. That silence told her everything. Tears appeared unexpectedly. For the first time in months, she looked genuinely emotional. Not strategic, not rehearsed. Human. I never wanted this. The sentence hung in the air. Heavy, complicated, painful. I looked at her carefully. What exactly didn't you want? Amanda opened her mouth, then closed it, as if the truth sat just behind her lips, desperate to escape, but still trapped. Finally, she stood, without answering, without explaining, without confessing. At the door, she paused, then spoke one final sentence, a sentence that chilled me. Things are about to get worse. And then she left. I sat awake for hours afterward, thinking about those words. Things are about to get worse. Not might, not could, are. Which meant Amanda knew something significant, something imminent. And the next morning, I discovered exactly what she meant. Because waiting in my driveway was a sheriff's vehicle, and standing beside it was a man carrying legal documents. The sheriff's vehicle sat in my driveway like a warning. For a few seconds, I remained inside my car, staring through the windshield. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Amanda's words from the night before echoed in my head. Things are about to get worse. She had known. Somehow, she had known. A man stood beside the vehicle holding a folder. Not a deputy, not someone in uniform, just a county process server working alongside the sheriff's office. The moment he saw me, he approached. Mrs. Nicole Wright. I swallowed. Yes. He handed me several documents. I've been instructed to deliver these. The folder felt unusually heavy, as though it carried more than paper, as though it carried months of lies finally surfacing. I thanked him, then watched as he returned to his vehicle and drove away. For several moments, I simply stood there. The wind moved through the maple tree overhead. Birds chirped. The world continued as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. I looked down at the documents, then slowly walked inside. Amanda was already waiting in the kitchen. The moment she saw the papers, her face went pale. Not surprised, not confused, afraid. My stomach twisted, because that reaction confirmed exactly what I suspected. She knew. Brian entered a moment later. One look at the envelope, and all color drained from his face, too. The silence became unbearable. Finally, I spoke. What is this? Neither answered. I held up the documents. What is this? Amanda lowered her eyes. Brian stared at the floor. And suddenly I was tired. Not angry, not emotional, just tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the manipulation, tired of pretending none of us knew what was happening. I opened the packet. The documents described an action connected to the disputed property filings. Formal proceedings, reviews, requests for records, legal notifications. Exactly the kind of paperwork Richard had warned might arrive. I slowly looked up. You knew. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but this time the tears didn't affect me. Not because I had stopped loving her, because I had finally learned the difference between love and accountability. You knew this was coming, Amanda whispered. Mom? No. My voice remained calm, steady, stronger than I felt. You knew. The silence answered for her. For the first time since this nightmare began, nobody hid behind concern. Nobody talked about safety. Nobody mentioned assisted living. Nobody pretended this was about protecting me. The masks were finally slipping. Brian cleared his throat.
We can explain.
I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised even me. Months of deception, and now they wanted explanations.
Go ahead.
Brian glanced toward Amanda. Amanda looked away. Neither spoke, because explanations require truth, and truth had been missing from this house for a very long time. That afternoon, I met Richard Bennett. The moment he saw me, he knew the papers had arrived.
Good.
I blinked. Good. Richard nodded. Very good. That wasn't the reaction I expected. He motioned for me to sit, then opened several files. Nicole, they're reacting. I frowned.
What does that mean?
Richard smiled faintly.
It means they're losing control.
The words sent a strange sense of relief through me. For months, I had felt trapped, cornered, outnumbered. Now the balance was shifting. Richard pointed toward the documents.
These filings force transparency.
Transparency. The one thing Amanda and Brian never wanted. Because secrets survive in darkness, not in daylight. Then Richard showed me the evidence he had been building. The disputed signatures, the timeline inconsistencies, the property history, the witness concerns, the financial pressures, piece by piece, page by page. The entire structure Amanda and Brian built suddenly looked fragile, very fragile. Then Richard showed me one final document, and everything changed. I stared at it for several seconds before speaking.
What is this?
Richard folded his hands.
The original ownership protection filing.
My pulse accelerated. The document looked old, very old, signed decades earlier, by my father, by attorney Edward Lawson, and by me. I remembered signing it. Barely, but I remembered. Richard pointed toward a specific paragraph. I read it twice, then a third time. My eyes widened, because suddenly I understood why James had protected those records so carefully. Why he hid copies. Why he left letters. Why he kept warning me to trust documents instead of stories. The protection language was clear. Painfully clear. The property could not be transferred in the manner Amanda and Brian attempted without triggering serious legal issues. I looked up slowly. Richard smiled.
They never found this document.
A chill moved through me, because if Amanda and Brian had known about it, none of this would have happened. Their entire plan depended on missing information. Information James made sure survived. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this began. Confidence. Not hope. Confidence. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. It was standing in the open, waiting. 3 days later, the confrontation finally arrived. The real one. The unavoidable one. I came home to find Amanda sitting alone at the kitchen table. No Brian, no folders, no rehearsed speeches. Just Amanda, the daughter I once knew. She looked exhausted, defeated, broken. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Amanda started crying. Real crying. Not controlled tears. Not strategic tears. The kind that come when a person can no longer carry the weight of their choices. I sat across from her. The same kitchen, the same table, the same room where everything had begun. Amanda covered her face. I'm sorry. The words barely escaped. I remained silent. She continued. None of this was supposed to happen. I almost asked what exactly she meant. The paperwork, the lies, the pressure, the betrayal. But I already knew. Amanda lowered her hands. Her eyes were red. We were in trouble. There it was, the truth. Finally. Not concern, not protection. Trouble. Financial trouble. Debt. Pressure. Fear. Exactly what Richard suspected. Amanda stared at the table. Brian kept saying we'd lose everything. I listened quietly. He said the house could save us. The sentence hurt, not because it surprised me, because hearing it aloud made it real. My home, James's home, our memories, reduced to a solution. Amanda wiped her eyes. I told myself we'd fix everything later. I nodded slowly. Many bad decisions begin that way. Just this once. We'll fix it later. Nobody gets hurt. Then reality arrives, and people do get hurt. Amanda looked at me. For the first time in months, I recognized my daughter. Not because she was innocent, because she was finally honest. Can you forgive me? The question shattered my heart. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing, and sometimes people confuse them. I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers, then answered honestly. I love you. Amanda cried harder. But love doesn't erase what happened. The silence that followed felt heavy, necessary, true. Then the front door opened. Brian walked inside. The moment he saw us sitting together, he froze. And for the first time since he entered my home, he looked afraid, truly afraid. Because he immediately understood something. Amanda had stopped protecting the lie. And once the lie disappeared, all that remained was the truth. The truth James had preserved. The truth Richard uncovered. The truth Linda protected. The truth waiting to be spoken aloud. And tomorrow morning, that truth would arrive at my house in the form of one final visitor. The county clerk. I barely slept. The house felt different. Not because of the legal papers, not because of Richard, not even because Amanda had finally admitted the truth. The house felt different because the lies had ended. For months, every room had contained secrets. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway, the dining table. Every space had become a stage where people pretended. Now the pretending was over. The next morning arrived gray and quiet. Rain clouds covered the sky. Amanda sat alone at the kitchen table holding a cup of coffee she never drank. Brian remained upstairs. Neither of them spoke. Around 9 o'clock, a car pulled into the driveway. Amanda looked through the window. Her face immediately lost color. The county clerk. I stood. For months, I had imagined this moment. The woman who first raised questions. The woman who noticed inconsistencies. The woman who refused to ignore the documents. Now she had arrived. Linda Whitmore entered carrying a folder. Richard Bennett walked beside her. Seeing both of them together gave me strength. Amanda slowly stood. Brian finally came downstairs. Nobody knew where to look. Linda spoke professionally, calmly, respectfully, but her words carried enormous weight. She explained that the county review had been completed. The questioned filings had been examined. Supporting documentation had been reviewed. Ownership records had been verified. Witness statements had been considered. Timeline inconsistencies had been addressed. The room felt perfectly silent. I could hear rain against the windows. Then Linda looked directly at me. Mrs. Wright, based upon the documents and findings, the ownership protections remain in effect. My chest tightened. Richard nodded slightly. Linda continued. The disputed filing cannot establish the authority that was represented. No one spoke. Brian stared downward. Amanda covered her mouth, and suddenly the fear I had carried for months disappeared. Not all at once, but enough, because the truth had finally reached the room. Not emotions, not accusations, facts, documents, records, evidence. Exactly what James told me to trust. Linda placed several papers on the table. Everything felt strangely calm, almost anticlimactic, because the real battle had never been legal. The real battle had been believing myself, believing my instincts, believing that kindness did not require surrender. Richard spoke next. His voice remained gentle. Nicole remains the sole legal authority regarding the property. The sentence landed heavily, not because I wanted to win, because I wanted to survive. Brian finally spoke. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. This wasn't supposed to happen. Linda looked at him. Which part? No one answered, because there was no answer. Amanda began crying, not quietly, not politely. She cried with the weight of every decision finally collapsing around her. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Brian stood. I'll pack our things. Amanda looked at him. Something passed between them. Fear, anger, blame. Perhaps all three. Brian walked upstairs. The sound of drawers opening echoed through the house. Suitcases, closets, boxes. The sounds people make when leaving. Amanda remained at the table. Eventually, Linda and Richard finished reviewing the paperwork. Before leaving, Linda looked at me. You protected yourself. I thought about that. For months, I had believed I was being selfish, difficult, suspicious. Instead, I had simply protected myself. Richard squeezed my shoulder. James was a very smart man. I smiled through tears. Yes. He trusted you. That sentence broke me, because somewhere along the way I had stopped trusting myself. James never had. After they left, the house became quiet again. Only Amanda and I remained in the kitchen. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, I ruined everything. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The exhaustion, the shame, the regret, the fear. For the first time in many months, I saw Amanda completely. No masks, no excuses, just my daughter. You made terrible choices. She nodded through tears. I know. You lied. Another nod. You let someone convince you that your mother's home was a solution to your problems. Amanda covered her face. I know. I sat beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. Because despite everything, she was still my child. I can't pretend this didn't happen. She cried harder. I know. I can't trust you the same way. More tears. I know. Finally, I touched her hand. But that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Amanda looked up. Her eyes were red, broken, hopeful, confused, all at once. I don't deserve that. No, I answered honestly. None of us deserve love. That's why it's a gift. She cried again, and this time, I cried with her. Not because everything was fixed, because healing had finally begun. Brian left that afternoon. He carried boxes to his truck without speaking. He never looked directly at me. Just before leaving, he stopped near the front door. I am sorry. The words sounded genuine, late, but genuine. I nodded. I hope you figure things out. He lowered his eyes, then left. Amanda remained another 2 days. Not because I asked her to, because she wasn't ready to leave. Those 2 days were strange, painful, honest. For the first time in months, we talked. Really talked. About debt, fear, pressure, bad decisions, pride, shame. Amanda admitted that Brian's financial problems had become overwhelming. Loans, investments, losses, promises. Everything had collapsed. The house became their answer, their rescue plan. At first, Amanda convinced herself it was temporary, then necessary, then justified, and eventually she stopped asking whether it was right. That was the true tragedy. Not greed, fear. Fear can make ordinary people do extraordinary damage. When Amanda finally packed her things, she stood in the front hallway for several moments. The same hallway where she learned to ride roller skates. The same hallway where James carried her after she broke her arm at 11. The same hallway where Christmas photographs were taken every year. She looked around quietly, then turned toward me. "Will you ever forgive me?" I thought carefully. "Because forgiveness deserves honesty." "Yes." She began crying. "But forgiveness takes time." She nodded. "I understand." I hugged my daughter. Not because everything was repaired, because some things deserve a chance to heal. Weeks passed. The house became quiet again. Peaceful. I replanted flowers, rehung family photographs, moved furniture back, opened windows, cooked meals, laughed with grace, attended church. For the first time since James died, I stopped surviving and started living again. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. James's letter rested beside me. The final lines had become my favorite. Trust the documents, not the stories. But I had learned something else. Trust yourself. Because sometimes people who love you become afraid. And fearful people make terrible choices. That doesn't mean you surrender your voice. It doesn't mean you abandon your dignity. And it certainly doesn't mean you become a squatter in your own kitchen. The kitchen belongs to the person who built the home, the person who protected it, the person who stayed. And when Amanda once called me a squatter in my own kitchen, she forgot something very important. I wasn't standing in her house. She was standing in mine. And thanks to James, the truth, and one county clerk who refused to ignore the facts, I finally remembered that myself.